Alrighty, hello and welcome to COPA's Safety Seminar Awareness Panel on Helicopter Operations. Tonight we're focusing on the recreational rotary aircraft world from a safety perspective and how we can learn from industry. My name is Sharon Chung. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm the Director of National Programming for COPA, Canada's largest aviation community, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Let me just advance my slides here so you can get a little bit of a snippet of what today will look like. We have representation from the Helicopter Association of Canada, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, Transport Canada, Garmin, and potentially Maxcraft if we can. There's some technical difficulties on that side. The panel itself will start with a presentation from each group, followed by a short Q&A. Between those presentations, we'll then come to a full circle with a panel discussion towards the end. So please don't be shy. Use the chat to the right of your screen and ask any questions. We won't be able to get to every individual question tonight, but if you wish to have your inquiry addressed, feel free to email us at copa@copanational.org. Before I continue to the next slide, if at any point you find we've gone too fast with the topics for tonight, please keep in mind a recording will be made available in a few short days. It's an incredible panel filled with experts who can enhance your helicopter flying journey. This is definitely the time to ask your questions within any given moment. So I've mentioned this in the past, but just a reminder, there is an aircraft insurance incentive through Magnus. So check it out online there for this endorsement itself. I won't sit here too long. You're familiar with our annual prizes that we are giving away at our next seminar. It's the last seminar of 2021, and we're very pleased to have this great list of prize giveaways. We also have Garmin in the room today, so happy to have Joey with us. And I just wanted to share a quick update on our comprehensive home and auto insurance, with PUL employee benefits, their accidental death and dismemberment policy with AIG. It now has two more class categories for drone operators. And with that, I also have a poll going on, so I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and take a look at those results. 45% of you are from Ontario, and 16 from BC. Hello, and hope everyone's safe and doing well out there. 4% in Alberta, and a good chunk in Quebec as well at 19%. So that's fantastic. Let's go ahead and rock and roll with our first speaker, Isabelle Langevin, who is the Manager of Regional Operations of Air Investigations within the Quebec region with TSB. So Isabelle, as you start pulling up your slides, I hope you can walk us through your background. It's quite extensive, how long you've been with TSB, and more about the work that you do. You're frozen for me right now, if you're sharing your... Oh. Can anybody hear Isabelle?
No, we can't hear.
No problem.
Stand by. Am I still frozen?
You're still frozen, but I hear you. There we go.
Okay, here we go. As soon as I try to turn the... I'm having issues with the internet tonight. Okay, so hopefully this will work. Can everybody see my presentation?
Looks great.
Okay. So yes, well, welcome to the webinar tonight. So Isabelle Langevin, Regional Manager for Air Investigation for the Quebec region. Background in aviation, I started back in 1991 as an employee with Canadian Airlines. I was basically working reservations. That's what started me in aviation. Then I started doing my flight training. I am a fixed wing. I do apologize. My helicopter knowledge of flying is limited to being a passenger, but I do love it. So after completing my license, I became a flight instructor. Did that for a few years before moving on to Air Inuit. So I flew up in Nunavik, mainly Twin Otters and Dash 8s and a little bit of King Air as well. After spending quite a few years at Air Inuit, I moved on to go to Transport Canada, where I was there for 8 years in charge of aerodromes, and then I went to the TSB. And I've been there ever since and absolutely love it. So that's the quick career in a nutshell. So for the presentation tonight, I will concentrate on planning and managing your flight. As we do our investigations, we do find that sometimes the issues, as you know, well, they start in planning. The better prepared you are, well, the better your flight will go usually. So just a quick note as to what our mandate is. Transportation Safety Board is, basically our mandate is to advance transportation safety in the air, marine, rail, and pipeline modes of transportation. All are under federal jurisdiction. And how we do that is by conducting independent investigations, identifying safety deficiencies, identifying causes and contributing factors, making recommendations, and reporting publicly on our findings. A quick note, we do get well over 3,000 incidents reported every year. So for obvious reasons, we're a small agency, we cannot investigate them all, but we will investigate if we think that by publishing a report, we will advance transportation safety. Transportation Safety Board is an independent agency created by an act of Parliament back in 1990. We report directly to Parliament through the President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada. And as such, we do not have an in-between between us and the government. A lot of people think we are with Transport Canada. That used to be pre-1990, but now we are fully independent. And also of note, it is not the function of the TSB to assign fault or determine civil or criminal liability. There's other means to do that, and they usually rest with other organizations. Our mandate is to investigate and know why something happened and then be able to compel change to enhance transportation safety. We're the good guys, I like to say. So if we start as a pilot, are you ready? And we've all had that feeling. Sometimes we feel we're invulnerable. It's never going to happen to me, but unfortunately, as these photographs show, it does happen. It's never a fun thing. Sometimes it's major, other times it's just losing your tailbone. So in our investigations, and we're going to go to the basics here, we found first thing we look at is always something happens, we're going to look at the license and the medical. And we do find more often than we'd like that either the license is non-existent, not valid, expired, not the right one, or that the medical hasn't been renewed in quite a few years. Qualifications and currency. We see it especially with night flights. Private pilots, be it helicopter or aircraft, will get caught at night either without a night rating or without meeting the requirements to carry passengers. And knowledge and skills, well, that speaks for itself. And, you know, as pilots, this is usually how we see ourselves. However, reality is a little bit more like this fella on the right. I include myself in that, by the way. So another thing we look at when we do our investigation is human factors, the infamous Swiss cheese model that we all like to refer to. But it gives us defenses, and that's what we look at. What do we have for defense as a private pilot? Well, we have the Canadian air regulations, the CARs. They are there to protect us. They will tell us not to fly too low because that might hurt. It might not be a good thing. What else? We have procedures and checklists. Why? Because the manufacturer says that usually this is how you should fly your helicopter, and the checklist is there to protect you before you take off. Every time we hear of somebody who ran out of fuel, we go back to, but isn't it on the checklist? So easy things, little things, but they do come into effect. We have maintenance. Is my helicopter airworthy? Are there any snags that I should be aware of before I take off today? Training. I may have had a license for a few years, but sometimes it might not hurt to go back up with a flight instructor just to review some procedures that we don't get to do often. How often do we go and practice engine failures on our own, just for the fun of it? And the two big ones, preparation, airmanship, and decision making. The more prepared we are, usually the better our flight will go. And also, the more prepared we are, the less likely we are to choke or panic if something doesn't go as planned. And we should always plan an alternate plan. So basically, have a plan and an alternate, leave yourself an out. So when we go into decision making, of course, there's this decision making before we take off when we plan our flight, and decision making throughout the flight. What is decision making? Well, selecting a plan amongst different alternatives, but also the ability to adapt and make changes if the situation changes. So what are the influences? Well, you have yourself, the pilot. You are continually making decisions about your own competency, state of health, level of fatigue, and any other variables that may affect your ability to fly that day. You will base your decision on your aircraft or helicopter. So am I using my own? Am I renting one today? Again, do I go back to any snags that may affect my flight? Do I have all my equipment working properly? The environment. Well, the big one is always the weather. Of course, that may change. It's never, there's what you see on paper and the reality once you're in flight. Also, am I going to have to deal with ATC today? I'm leaving my house to go to my cottage that's up 100 miles north of here. It's the middle of winter. Is it clear? Can I go? What's my landing surface going to be like? That's all the environment. That may change as well. It's never the same for 2 days in a row. And then we have the operation. Well, the operation is the interaction of the three factors above: the pilot, the aircraft, and the environment. All three are taken into considerations when making a decision to undertake and continue with a flight. And then if any of these things change, you have to ask yourself, is the trip worth the risk? And then the other one is situational awareness. You have to remain aware of what's going on and how it may affect your flight. And again, that changes as beginning of your flight, things will be one way. And as you fly, things can change, and you have to be ready to make a change, and you have to change your plan. And again, we have the 5 element of risk. Flying is a risky thing. We all know it. We all love it, and that's why we do it. Well, they're the same 5 element. And how we cope and manage the risk will affect our flying. And when we look at pilot, though, for the risk, what is our risk? Well, it's the stressors, how we're going to react to a stressful event. It can affect our ability to cope. Humans under pressure can be affected in different ways. So the theory in one thing, when it happens to you in your helicopter, it's a different thing, and we never know how we're going to react. But that's when good preparation comes in. So the more prepared you are, usually a better and quicker you're going to be able to react to any kind of situation that may come your way. So how we reduce the stress? We plan, we prep, and we practice and repeat. The aircraft, well, adapt to conditions that may be different than what was planned or expected. One of the big ones we see with people, and it actually did happen recently to a private pilot, winds. Well, I calculated my fuel for so much, for these kind of winds. This is what I had on my prep. And oops, the winds changed. They were stronger, and all of a sudden, you don't have enough fuel to make it to your destination. And then we have the environment. The weather may change. So I've taken my weather. I have it for when I depart. I have it for my destination. What's going to happen in between? And maybe that cold front will come in quicker than expected, and I'll get caught. So I will have to revise my plan at that point. Where am I flying? Am I over built-up area? Am I in the middle of nowhere, over forest? So what are my options? So in the operation, again, constantly reevaluate. Situational awareness, same thing. You must continuously reevaluate where you are, where you're at, where you're going. And what can I do to improve my decision making? Again, prepare and practice. That's what it comes down to. So now we get to, when I was asked to do this presentation, it was, what are the main factor that you see with, be it helicopter or aircraft accident and private pilots? There's two big ones that come back and that we've seen in the recent years. Unintended flight into IMC. So that can happen during the day, it can happen at night. And low altitude flights. And both can result in a loss of control in flight or a ground collision. And I have a couple of pictures coming up. This is an accident that happened a few years ago in Quebec. Pilot had left Val d'Or on his way to Mirabel and encountered some pretty bad weather on the way. Unfortunately, it was somebody without a lot of experience and did not, when he entered the conditions, the IFR, did not turn around and just kept going until he hit the side of a mountain. Unfortunately, he did not make it. Another one that we had a few years ago, and this is completely different conditions, obviously, clear blue sky, beautiful bluebird day. Beautiful day for a low flight. So we see the direction of flight here over the river with a beautiful power line that goes right across it. What happened with that one is the helicopter did hit the power lines and fell in the water. It was dug out a few days later. On this one, we had 2 fatalities and 1 person who survived. Should never have happened. Again, when we talked about the cars earlier on, when they say there's minimum flight altitudes, it's just, it is for your own safety. And I do understand low flying. I don't know a single pilot who hasn't done it, but it doesn't mean that it's a good idea. And what I will demonstrate now, and I will apologize, this is a weather sequence that was taken for a 172 accident, but I used that one because that's where I had the most data to really drive home the point of the importance of looking at your weather and looking at the GFA. So it can, just to demonstrate how what you have at point A and point B and what's in between can be completely different. So this was for 172, is back in September 2009. 2 pilots, two aircrafts that departed Mirabel for a night VFR flight to Sherbrooke. For those of you who are familiar with the region, it's not a very long flight. It's a little bit over 100 nautical miles. So you're leaving Mirabel, which is a fairly built up area because you'll be going around the Montreal region, and you're going to Sherbrooke, which, although it's a big enough town, in between the two, there's nothing. It is a black hole. So on this one, on that day, we had a very strong cold front that swept through the province, and you can see it right now. It's just a little bit past Sherbrooke, but it's still there, and you can still feel the effect. So leave Mirabel, go to Sherbrooke. So what does it say for Mirabel? You have a METAR, the weather was good, so there was no issues with the actual departure from Mirabel that night. And the weather that it shows behind it tends to confirm that. We do have broken layers, 3,000 to 6,000 feet. Then we're going towards Sherbrooke, and we have that lovely B area with the importance to go and read what that says. Because although it's mostly VFR, you can still get patchy ceilings from 3 to 600 AGL. That's not very high, especially when you know that the eastern townships, well, there's mountains. It may not be the Rockies, but there's still mountains and hills, and they do get in the way. They don't move for you. But we also had the possibility of isolated CBs giving 1 mile heavy thunder showers. But now what the importance of the GFA is that purple area is where they ran into trouble. In that purple area, it said that over eastern and southern sections, isolated TCUs, 8,000 feet, 5 miles, light rain showers, mist, patchy ceilings between 800 and 1500 feet AGL. And when we go, and that's what I say for this one, we actually had the satellite images that we were able to pull out. When we put the GFA over it, that green spot is exactly where the aircraft went down. So they departed at an altitude of 3,500 feet, entered clouds the first time, descended back into VFR. And when I say the ability to make decision and change your plan, the decision was to continue with the flight. Even though the conditions were not what were expected, they kept going. And unfortunately, they ran into cloud a second time, and one of the two aircraft never made it back. They hit the ground and struck the ground shortly thereafter. So when we look at this, and those are the statistics I had pulled out for the past 5 years, so 2016 through to 2020, we see that privately owned helicopters had 41 accidents. So, and that included 12 fatalities and 7 fatal accidents. That's quite high when we consider that commercial helicopters had 83 for the same time period. When we look at the actual reports that were pulled out, we had 4 Class 3s. So the TSB, we have really 3 kinds of investigation. A Class 2, which would be one that usually would have recommendations attached to it. Class 3 is our most well-known type of report, where we do have factual and an analysis section with findings at the end. So we have 4 of those that were written in the past 5 years. And out of these 4, 1 was mechanical failure, 2 were regarding IMC, flight into IMC, and 1 was a low flying, which is the one over the river that hit the power lines. And then we have the Class 4. Class 4 is just a factual, so there's no analysis, no findings. It's usually factual information with a safety message. And most of these that I could find out were basically, one was, again, low flying that hit wires, and the other 2 were night VFR flight that ended up into IMC. Incidents, we don't have a lot that get reported for private helicopters for a good reason that usually, and I'll get that on the next slide. When do you need to report? Well, any accident. Especially if a person is killed or sustains a serious injury, the aircraft itself sustains structural failure or damage that adversely affects the aircraft's structural strength, performance, or flight characteristics. So basically, if you need to fix it before you can fly again, it's an accident. Or if the aircraft is missing. Incidents, and that's where for private pilot it comes in, is that you only need to report an incident if your certified takeoff weight is greater than 4,960 pounds. Most privately owned helicopters are below that, therefore there is no requirement to report. Or all commercial aircraft if you're under parts 7 of the cars, which obviously doesn't apply to you. But when in doubt, and how do you report, by the way, sorry, we've got somebody on standby 24 hours, 7 days a week. The 1-800 number will give you the choice of French or English as well as region. Or you can go to our website where you will find a form, a PDF form that you can fill online and send to us. If you're not sure, when in doubt, just call us. We'll be more than happy to talk to you, give you the information. And if it is not reportable, we will tell you why. But if not, we'll definitely work with you to help you with the report. And that's it. Are there any questions?
I'll start collecting some of those questions early here. First off, TSB, the good guys, eh?
We are the good guys. We don't blame anybody.
I'm going to turn your screen share off so we can see you there. I mentioned in the chat the PDM and the human factors part of it. Very, very good overview. The visuals were also really good at showing how weather can affect your flight. I may have missed it. Was the example you shown, was that a real example? Or
It is. It is a real example, and unfortunately, a 25-year-old young lady lost her life that night.
It's very sad.
It was very sad, especially for something that's so preventable.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's good to know that it was based off of something, so it paints an even starker picture there. And I know that you didn't have as much data on the private side as you had mentioned, but were there categories where you saw the most occurrences for private side?
It's the same too that bite everybody. It's the unintended flight into IMC, usually at night, and the low flying.
Okay.
A lot of Rio strikes, unfortunately.
Very good. Hold on to that thought, because I will come back to UIMC. Let's switch over to TCCA. I'll get your slides ready here. Thank you very much for that presentation, Isabel. Okay, Simon and Ludovic, you're welcome to come on stage now. We can hear you. We can see you. You're joining us from the Transport Canada office today.
We are, and we're having a little bit of technical difficulty as well in our building. So we're probably going to go off camera because we find that it'll probably be better for us. But we just wanted you to see what we look like and say hello to everyone. And we'll come back later on camera with the panel discussion.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Hello from a distance. I'm going to get your slides started here. You can see all right?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
So good evening, everyone. Our contribution this evening is to briefly introduce you to Transport Canada's General Aviation Safety Program. We'll provide you with some statistics and discuss what our vision and game plan is to work with the general aviation helicopter community so we can help reduce the number of privately registered helicopter accidents. My name is Simon Garrett, and I am the lead of the General Aviation Safety Program. Prior to becoming the lead of the General Aviation Safety Program, I spent my first 3 years with Transport Canada as the co-lead of the General Aviation Safety Campaign. Previous to that, I spent close to 20 years at the Rockcliffe Flying Club in Ottawa, with the last 15 years as the CFI Operations Manager and a TC-approved pilot examiner. I hold an airline transport pilot fixed-wing license, and 8,000 of my nearly 10,000 hours of flying has actually been instructing. And presenting with me tonight is my colleague, Ludovic Masson. Ludovic?
Hello, everyone. So my name is Ludovic Masson. I'm the program manager for General Flight Standard at Transport Canada. In this role, I'm overseeing the General Aviation Safety Program. It's been almost a month now I'm at this role. Prior to that, I was a heliport standards inspector for over a year. And before that, I worked for Transport Canada, but as a inspector with General Flight Standard, I worked along with Simon on the General Aviation Safety Campaign for 2 years. And before Transport Canada, I was an helicopter pilot. I worked 10 years in the French Army on helicopter Puma. Then I came to Canada in 2011, where I mainly work on the Bell 212 in the Arctic. And also I work on different kind of aerial work on A-Star, Bell 206, 47, and Bell 212. I possess an airline transport license. I have an instrument rating and night rating, and I have experience in mountain, offshore, and offshore flying, NVG, etc.
The General Aviation Safety Program is a continuation of the General Aviation Safety Campaign, where the campaign focused on a re-engagement with the general aviation community and reducing the number of fatal accidents through a non-regulatory approach. The program is going to continue its same engagement with the general aviation community and also through a non-regulatory approach, but we're going to be more focused on the total number of accidents and researching root causes of the top 4 identified occurrence categories, so we can develop tangible mitigations which will help reduce the number of accidents. The program will also continue to develop the promotional and educational material, as well as best practice guidelines for use by the GA community. The General Aviation Safety Program will continue with the General Aviation Safety Campaign philosophy of continuous improvement through lessons learned, and by not reinventing the wheel. Therefore, the program is modeled after the FAA Safety Program. Our Canadian Joint Steering Committee, which provides guidance and oversight to the program, currently has 31 general aviation associations and organizations participating from across Canada. Our Canadian Safety Analysis team liaises with the steering committee and provides guidance and oversight to the working groups. However, unlike the FAA model, our safety analysis team currently consists of TC's General Aviation Safety Program team members. The working groups all transitioned over from the campaign, and they continue to develop promotional and educational materials as well as best practice guidelines, so we can bring more awareness to safety issues and concerns within the GA community. And as I mentioned earlier, they are now starting to do research into the root causes of the top 4 ranked occurrence categories in an effort to develop those tangible mitigations which will assist in reducing the number of accidents in these areas. So why do we want to reach out to the privately registered helicopter community? Well, we know that a number of privately registered helicopters in Canada is increasing, or the numbers are increasing. We know the number of privately registered helicopter accidents, both fatal and non-fatal, are increasing. And we also know that the commercial helicopter operators have the Helicopter Association of Canada as their resource and their support, whereas privately registered helicopters don't have maybe that support or that resource, and they are part of the general aviation community of which we want to and are looking after. When you look at these statistics, which are obtained from the Canadian Civil Aircraft Registry, they show an increase of over 250 privately registered helicopters over the last 12 years. This equates to an increase of 31%. The number of amateur-built helicopters has increased by 41 or 43% over the same time period. And of course, all indications that we're receiving are that the numbers will continue to increase. The total number of privately registered helicopter accidents are starting to increase as well. You'll see that there's a steady trend upwards in the last 10 years. Also, we see that the number of non-fatal accidents are also steadily increasing, and the number of fatal accidents as well. Now, while it's true that the numbers are low, it is for this reason that we want to reach out to the privately registered helicopter community at this time, so we can work together proactively to keep the numbers low rather than have to work reactively at a later date with much higher numbers. And of note, with the 3 fatal accidents out of 9 in 2018 and the 3 fatal accidents out of 11 in 2019, so just in those last 2 years, over 30% of the total number were fatal. The accident rates that we're showing you here have been obtained by using the number of privately registered helicopters as the denominator. As you can see, the total number of accidents and non-fatal accidents are quite erratic, but we are now starting to see a stabilized trend in an upward direction, and this is where we want to focus our efforts. In comparison, we have added the accident rate for fixed-wing privately registered aircraft and privately owned ultralights. And as mentioned prior, the numbers are low, but as a ratio compared to airplanes and ultralights, the rate is quite high. So through the General Aviation Safety Program and with cooperation from the privately registered helicopter community, we would like to reverse this trend. So now that we know the number of privately registered helicopters in Canada are increasing, as well as the number of accidents, we need to identify what is causing the accidents so that we can develop effective mitigation. This chart shows the cause of accidents by initiating occurrence from 2009 through to 2019. And if you study the chart closely, 5 occurrence categories stand out. They are system component failure of power plant, unknown, which we'll talk about later, abnormal runway contact, collision with an obstacle on takeoff or landing, and loss of control in flight. All of these occurrence categories are those developed by the Commercial Aviation Safety Team and the ICAO Taxonomy Team, which has now become an industry standard.
As I just want to mention regarding this chart, there is maybe a discrepancy between ARC, as you see on the curve, is abnormal runway contact, and log-G, which means loss of control on the ground. Indeed, I analyzed all accident reports from 2013 and 2018, And I found that most of the abnormal runway contact were in fact loss of control on the ground, because some accidents were dynamic rollover, and they have been classified as abnormal runway contact, but as per the ICAO taxonomy, it's indeed a loss of control on the ground. So I found that between ARC, abnormal runway contact, and loss of control on the ground, 70% of those accidents are actually dynamic rollover. And we will work to correct it or to be in the same page for this type of accidents to put the right qualification.
This chart depicts the previously shown occurrence categories in rank, and you will note that not far behind the top 5 ranked are low altitude, loss of control on the ground, and other. This chart depicts the occurrence categories by rank as shown prior, but superimposed is the number of fatalities. So even though we have a high number of power plant accidents, the number of fatalities in those accidents is low, whereas we do not have as many low altitude or CFIT accidents, but when they do occur, the fatalities are much higher. So what are we going to do with all of this information, and how are we going to proceed? And to answer this question and close out the presentation, I'm going to hand control over to Ludovic.
Yes. What is your vision or game plan to mitigate this number of privately registered helicopter accidents? So our aim, we would like to create a rotary wings working groups, as we make with other area. We have multiple working groups now through the General Aviation Safety Program. We have the ultralight working group, which is fairly active and successful, the Voluntary Reporting working group, a maintenance working group, safety equipment working group, and so on. All those groups are composed by GA members, usually led either by TC or co-led between us and GA community or members, or is completely industry-led via the community or association. As a ultralight working group, the network is really important to be able to share, communicate, and bring awareness. It will be indeed a collaborative effort between us and other partners. We think that the community is better placed to know what is going on, and rather than us in our office. Therefore, it is much beneficial that we work together to improve safety. And we can bring awareness to the main cause of accident and find mitigation strategy. And we would like to develop promotional and educational materials. What can we do as promotional and educational materials? So first, it will be the best practice guides on operation, maybe on pre-flight, in-flight, and what to watch for. We can recall the best practice for landing in area other than aerodrome, like a confined space or helipads or pads, or in a field. So to recall all this specificity, what we have to watch for, like the winds, the obstacle, etc., the slope. And we can recall also through the best practice or safety seminars the dangers that exist for specific to helicopters, like vortex swing states, loss of tail rotor effect, and power settling, because those type of accidents still exist, and we have quite a number of them. And as I mentioned before, rollover, because 70% of the abnormal runway contact or loss of control of the ground are rollover. So we would like to avoid this. And we can also recall the danger of blade strikes and dangerous behavior like low altitude flying and pushing the weather that bring to unintended IMC. We can also promote the benefit of helmets and shoulder harnesses. I know for a fact helmets save lives, because I have 2 close friends that boys are probably still alive from a helicopter accident because they wore helmet, and shoulder harness because not everybody wears them, but it could save lives as well, as we can see in many TSB reports. So also, many promotional materials are outdated, such as posters, especially for on the helicopter side, so we can revamp them. So that means we don't have to reinvent any new material because some already exist, but we can make it fresher or revamp them. So I want to talk also ASL, Aviation Safety Letters. If you know, it still exists, the Aviation Safety Letters, and we would like to create articles to bring awareness. We know with ultralight working groups, We create an article for every edition of the aviation safety letter for the last year or two. So that's great. And we'd like to create safety seminars, as we mentioned. It could be approved for the 24 months recurrency, and it can be presented by us or by the industry itself in person or virtually. And it will be specific to all sectors. And I think that's it. And thank you very much for listening to us. And if you have any question or any issue about, and if you want to be part of this What Are We Doing working group, don't hesitate to contact us, Simon and I, and we'll be happy to help or create a working group with you. We can't hear you, Sharon. You're on mute.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to create a bingo sheet for that. Let me close your slides here. That was a great presentation. It makes a lot of sense to put resources behind a rotary wing working group. So it's good to see that, especially when we see those numbers. Just to reiterate the data there, 31% increase in the last 10 years of privately registered helicopters. Within that same period, 41% increase in home-built aircraft. But more serious numbers here is that 30% increase in the last, was it 2018, 2019 of the total number of accidents for private helicopters being fatal. So those are some pretty, I think the visuals and the information here painted a pretty difficult picture. So with that, do you have any theories on why there's an increase in accidents?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, of course, the registrations are increasing, as you've indicated. And also, too, unlike the fixed wing community, the privately registered helicopter community doesn't seem to have access to seminars and or recurrent training programs, which are helicopter specific. And that's one of the things that we did with the ultralight working group, is we made it more ultralight specific, because an ultralight pilot sitting in on kind of a fixed wing type recurrent training program, it was covering, some of the proficiency requirement of knowledge, but it really wasn't covering their specific area. And I think we have that gap in the helicopter community as well. And also, to the best of my knowledge, the privately registered helicopter community, it doesn't have an association or an organization to which they can belong or share information and address these safety issues or concerns. And we've found that since we've started the safety campaign and the safety program, by working with other sectors of the community, i.e. the ultralight working group and also the paragliding and SAC and others, we're really making a difference in outreach, and that is making a difference, to people at least having awareness and starting to think about, okay, just how proficient am I versus, I know I'm current, but how proficient am I? So I think that might pretty well cover some of the reason that we're having the increase in accidents.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, and COPA will certainly add to that. It's good to have an ultralight association and other groups, but we work to represent all forms of recreational aviation. So this is a starting point for us, and working with TCCA and supporting those materials that you're building in any way that we can. I read a research article not that long ago that had attributed an increase of 1,000% in filed in-flight incidents to COVID-related proficiency issues. So staying with that, the data came from the FAA's ASRS from their voluntary reporting system. How I know you don't have a magic 8-ball, but how much do you think that COVID has potentially affected these numbers and can continue to affect these numbers?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, as you said, we don't really have factual data here in Canada as to whether privately registered helicopters, the activity during COVID has increased or decreased. So at this time, I can only say, similar to the fixed wing pilots, it's probably the issue of currency versus proficiency. It's probably the top of the list, and especially if access to in-flight recurrent training has been restricted due to COVID. But when you look at the US numbers, and we know from working on Ludovic and I working on the campaign and program for the last 4 years now, we're very, very much parallel to the US figures. They just have a greater quantity, of course. And it's very rare to see a difference in the US findings as compared to the Canadian findings. So I would tend to say that we're probably similar to what the US findings are.
Yeah, we have no different issue. I think the issue is everywhere. It's the same across the globe, but as Simon mentioned, it's probably less training due to COVID, with school closed or school not able to be in-person training or see an instructor. So that may be why, but we don't have factual data.
Yeah, that's a reasonable assumption to make in the numbers being likely connected, and without the data, we don't really know, but we do know that long lapses in flying and combination with low flying time can have serious implications. This is kind of a question between TCCA and TSB. So going back to the unintended flights into instrument meteorological conditions, the UIMC accidents that were listed, how often do we see UIMC incidents occurring?
Well, from the Transport Canada side, with privately registered helicopters, we've only seen a couple. It seems that there would be more on the commercial operations side of things. But I'm not sure. Maybe Isabel can expand on that. She has the helicopter numbers on the commercial side, but on the private side, we're not seeing that many at this time anyway.
Sorry, I guess people are having a hard time understanding me. I'll try and move closer to my screen. Like I say, when I pull the accidents from the past 5 years, I mean, the report that we wrote, or the ones where we didn't have a report, but we just did a data gathering, it was still more than 50%, I believe, that was unintended flight into IMC. Mm-hmm. And again, that could be, some of them were at night, some of them were during the day. Mm-hmm. So it is quite a high number.
Yeah, and that's commercial and privately registered, Isabel?
That's just privately registered.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't look into detail at the commercials. I wouldn't have the numbers for that, but for definitely the private, there's a lot of unintended flight.
Okay, so that's interesting that our figures didn't come up with the numbers you have. So we'll have to check that out further with you.
And also, I want to mention about unintended IMC because as an helicopter pilot, I know that we may have tendency to push a bit more the weather than a fixed wing, because we know as an helicopter pilot, because it's a great aircraft, we can land anywhere at any time, almost anywhere, almost at any time. So I've tended this to push a bit more because we know we can land at any time if we still see the ground. And sometimes it's too late when we decided, because we start to get the tunneling effect and we just focus inside and on toward our direction. And it's happened to everyone. I've done the same thing, sometimes to push because I can see I can land there, I can land there, I can land there. Oops. But that's why, that's one thing I see, because I've seen this, I've seen from my colleague and myself too. So we have tendency to push more the weather as a fixed wing because we can land. We think we can land anywhere, but we don't land, and we should land at this time when we don't have we beyond the limit. Sorry.
Could voluntary reporting be an issue here, or be of benefit if we encourage the use, and how do we encourage more use of the SMS?
Well, absolutely. But first we must be realistic when it comes to voluntary reporting, because to encourage pilots to submit information when it's not required by regulation is difficult at the best of times, even though we know it can be very helpful to mitigate safety issues and concerns that we have and the community has. So I believe to even stand a chance at an effective voluntary reporting system, we need some cornerstones. And one of them is a non-punitive voluntary reporting policy for general aviation, similar to what SMS is for commercial operations. Because through the campaign and through the program, when we're working with the other sectors and we're looking to gather and embrace and encourage voluntary reporting, they always say, well, no, if it goes into CADORs or if we give it to you, then what's to say you're not going to come back and we're going to be enforced or we're going to be penalized or anything. So it's difficult. The other thing too is it would be important that a third party collect it. The community isn't going to be totally comfortable handing the information into Transport Canada. So a third party to collect and assimilate the information and de-identify it. And you know, that's fine, because as a safety program, our concern is the occurrence. We are just trying to gather data on as many occurrences as possible so that we can know where to focus our efforts. So the identification of the aircraft or knowing who the pilot is not an issue for us. And the other thing too, when it comes to voluntary reporting, you know, pilots are out there, they're recreational, they're enjoying their flight. So we need to find a platform that's, you know, quick and easy to use. So it needs to be easily downloadable, something they can just kind of click in and click out, or on their flight, keep track of the flight's progress and everything, or easily transferable. And we need minimal input. I can't see the GA pilot coming back from a flight and starting to fill out manually a 6-page report for an occurrence. And maybe they're not even wanting to do 1 page. But we need to find a platform that makes it easy, but most importantly, you know, a focused outreach to the community, emphasizing the importance of why we want the data, why we need the data, because of course the data drives safety and it allows us to focus on where we're going to put the effort. And we also need to make sure we have a clear statement of not only why and how it benefits you know, our purposes, but also how it's going to benefit them as pilots and or as a GA community as a whole. So I think we've got a number of things that need to be done before we can have an effective voluntary reporting system within the GA community. However, I'm pleased to say that with the other work we're doing with the ultralight working group and with the other working groups, we're making terrific headway. And just recently as last week, one of our voluntary reporting working groups, sub-working groups, it's a pilot project between 4 colleges and universities. And they finally, and when I say finally, because we've been working on it for about 3 or 4 months, they have now agreed that they're going to share their information with each other. And that was all done through General Aviation Safety Program. So for us, the flight training units are a good entry point because they're already familiar with the kind of voluntary reporting SMS kind of concept. And all we're trying to do is say, okay, you know, if we can just get that concept bridged over to the GA community, it will give us wonderful data that will help us focus in the right area and bring those accident rates down.
Oh gosh, that was a very good update. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think a third-party voluntary reporting system would be very powerful for the GA community. Obviously, impactful when it comes to safety. Those numbers could be used towards a group like COPA creating new initiatives that support. I hear a bit of echoing. I'm just going to mute everybody here. Certainly supporting different initiatives that we could put together towards new safety programs or campaigns. So very, very useful. Looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. Great to hear. No dig, but great to hear from a government body or just any organization or agency saying the need and expectation for an easy to use tool. The user experience is so important in this day and age, and you want to make it usable and easy to jump in and out of. So thank you very much for all that work and for this presentation. Ludovic, you have your hand up.
No, I just want to say something about voluntary reporting, and also it's to bring awareness. And I just want to underline, highlight that we need to know what's happening on the field too, because there is a lot of accident or incident, mostly incidents, that we are not aware of, and some things that are never reported. I'm thinking about, you know, sometimes overtalk, pilots don't report this because it's not good, or blade strike maybe. So we like to know what's happened to the field, and voluntary anonymous reporting, that would be great to know, because we can't bring awareness to this. And also for the pilot, I would just say, if they know that it happened to their peers, to most experienced people, they would think, yeah, maybe it could happen to them also. Because some often we think, you know, overtalk or blades, so okay, it's simple to avoid them, and it will never happen to me. But if you know it happens a lot through a voluntary reporting system, if we know it happens a lot, maybe we can help people avoid those conditions. So.
Very good, very good. Well, let's continue on and hear from Fred Jones, who is with the Helicopter Association of Canada. As you're pulling up your slides, can I just do a quick check with Steve Nunn and Daryl, if you can go on and off camera so I can see you're here? Oh, I hear you and see you. Okay, perfect.
Technology works.
All right, good. Thanks very much for checking on, and you can go back off camera and mute yourself. So Fred, you have quite the background. I'll go ahead and pull up your slides for you here. If you could share more about what your story is and how you got into helicopter flying.
Sure. A very brief summary. Can you hear me okay? Okay, very good. Started out fixed wing back in '78, chagrin to say. Went on to get an ATPL airplane, made the switch over to helicopters and went on to get an ATPL helicopter. I, over the years, I was a TSB accident investigator. I was a Transport Canada inspector. I'm formally trained as a lawyer. I was with the Air Transport Association of Canada for 12 years, most recently as their VP Flight Operations. I was with a VP with the Canadian Airports Council for 4 years, and I've been with the Helicopter Association of Canada for 13 years now, and about to go into semi-retirement at the end of the month. I still fly across all of those organizations. Once I left government, I've been flying during the summers for anywhere from 4 to 10 weeks, just to maintain some currency and connection with industry. So there are some would say I can't hold down a job, but I've enjoyed every phase of my career in aviation. And I'll start with the slides here, and I'm going to move through them slowly. I don't have a lot of them, but I wanted to drill down on each of the issues just a little bit, if I could. With your indulgence. First of all, a little bit about Canada and HAC, about 1,800 commercially operated helicopters in Canada. The association has about 110 commercial air operator members and about 140 industry suppliers. We have Canada's largest aviation convention and trade show, oddly, since we're probably the smallest segment of the commercial aviation community, but it's a very cohesive industry segment. Collectively, our operators account for about 80% of the commercially operated helicopters in Canada today. Full disclosure. As far as accidents are concerned, the commercial aviation community hasn't got this right either. We're still struggling with it. We average over the years about 3 fatal accidents each year. And as time goes by, when you take a look at the statistics, you'll see that there's a declining number of accidents, but not a significantly declining number of fatal accidents, which is sort of odd. And I think it's a function of the type of accidents that are occurring, because some accidents naturally lend themselves to fatalities, and others lend themselves to bent metal, but not generally serious injuries, fatalities. And on a number of occasions, as we see analysis taking place in the helicopter community, we see that sometimes there's a sense that if we reduce the overall accident rate, somehow we're going to reduce the fatal accident rate, and that's not always the case because of this difference in the type of accidents that's occurring. And what I've sort of learned over the years is that it probably makes sense to focus on the fatal accidents. If the most undesirable outcome of any accident is a fatality or serious injury, then perhaps we should focus on the fatal accidents. And I'll give you a few examples when we get on to the next couple of slides about the sort of accidents that I'm talking about. The trend, when you look to the US, the largest operator of helicopters in the world, you see a similar scenario. I serve on the board of what used to be called the International Helicopter Safety Team, but now called the Vertical Aviation Safety Team, to accommodate sort of urban air mobility, automated movement of aircraft, electrically operated aircraft that carry passengers, which are rapidly arriving on the vertical flight landscape. So that's going to be a major issue going forward. But the part of the accidents that we should consider here, and as I go through this, I've tried to look at our commercial aviation experience and compare it with the general aviation experience, and they are not so dissimilar. And there are a couple of issues that I'd like to highlight as I see it in how the general aviation community is different from commercial in some significant ways that may help to account for the difference in the accident rate. And then I'll talk about how, in my view at least, about how the general aviation community might go about improving that type of accident experience. So common fatal and non-fatal helicopter accidents, just so you understand what I'm talking about. When we look at fatal accidents, there was a really good discussion earlier about VFR and IMC, and sadly, commercial aviation community, as I examine the statistics, this is still a very significant cause of the accidents. And it's always struck me as ironic when you consider that these are aircraft that can land anywhere. I mean, I think what I brought with me to my perspective was fixed wing experience before coming to helicopters, and any of you that fly airplanes or have flown airplanes will appreciate that acid drip in your stomach as you're flying along in deteriorating weather and wondering whether you should be turning back, diverting, pressing on, and you just simply don't have the same option as a rule of landing, particularly in the winter with snow-covered ground or in remote areas where it may be some distance to an airport where you can land the aircraft. Helicopters are different, and they can land anywhere, but there's a stigma associated with doing that, and it's really something that as a culture, both in general aviation and commercial aviation, we need to get over. And I over the years myself in aviation and helicopter flying, and it's been over 30 years, I've spent the night in the helicopter on more than one occasion. In fact, I've even started into the high caloric content cookies that are in the survival kit. And they're not nearly as tasty as they sound. But I've spent almost 2 nights in the bush waiting for the weather to clear, and there's no shame in that. And the notes I've made in this part is technology is changing a number of things on this front, VFR and IMC, and but it's not changing the culture the way that it should. For example, there was a time when, early in my career in helicopters, where you'd be flying from one point to the next, and if you contemplated landing somewhere and waiting out the weather, there's a very real risk that if you have a flight note or a flight plan, that search and rescue is going to be called out. Well, if you're carrying an inReach, for example, or the company is tracking your flight, or somebody back at home is is tracking your flight on one of the other tracking units that is carried in general aviation. Can't say enough about, and I'm not plugging inReach, but I'm just saying the ability to text a message when you're going from one place to the other is absolutely game changing, because now you can ask somebody back at home to call and extend your flight plan to let them know you're landing. You can do it from the ground. It's not limited to line of sight. So it's a huge peace of mind, and will reduce the pressure that I know we all feel about having search and rescue called out unnecessarily. Another technological advance is virtually all of the commercial helicopter operators have tracking devices on the aircraft so that they can see the altitude, the speed they're at, whether they've stopped, the engine is shut down. Some of them can even communicate in real time with the aircraft on the ground. And that's a game changer too, because now the base knows what's going on, and potentially you can communicate with them to let them know you've had a delay, but everybody's safe, you're waiting on the ground. I've, like I said, overnight twice in my career, but I've spent probably another half a dozen occasions on the ground waiting for the weather to clear, and making that decision early is absolutely critical. So it's changing the complexion of the VFR into IMC accidents, but it still strikes me as nothing short of bizarre that the helicopter community is pressing on in this weather and not landing the aircraft and waiting. So accidents involving post-crash fires are generally fatality-related accidents. Controlled flight into terrain because you're flying along in IMC or very limited visibility, and you hit the side of a mountain or a hill or rising ground or whatever. Wire strikes, another high fatality type accident. Non-fatal accidents, and just to give you a couple examples, there are many: blade strikes, rollovers, tail boom strikes, bird strikes, and at the heart of many of the accidents is pilot decision making, flight planning, and I know Isabel went over some of this at the TSB and the importance of flight planning. But one of the things that struck me in general aviation that would distinguish commercial from general aviation is currency. Whether how often you're flying. I can tell you that when I go back and fly during the summer, if I go back every summer, it comes back pretty quick. But because I only go back during the summer, there were a couple of seasons where I was available for casual hire during the winter, and it had been years since I did any winter flying. And I headed back on that learning curve very quickly, because of the differences, the crust on the snow when you land, and one skid falling through, landing in deep snow where the snow is right up to the belly of the helicopter and you're digging it in and keeping the tail rotor out. Training is another one. I applaud Airbus helicopters for the training that they have done, at facilities or places like Montebello, where they've tried to bring the general aviation community together for recurrent training. Commercial aviation community, we have to do our annual recurrent training. We have to do our PPC every year. So, but also currency. But also one other scenario is just the sheer number of hours that a commercial versus a private pilot will do in the course of a year. And that means number of hours, but more importantly, it means exposure to a wide variety of circumstances. So different weather, terrain, changing weather. We're operating in many areas where we're operating on an area forecast, for example, and it's unpredictable to see different scenarios where the fog is rolling in off the East Coast, or whether the topographical features are causing changes, rapidly changing weather is also important too. So seeing a variety of scenarios unfold, super important. Purely mechanical failures, it's been my experience in the helicopter industry, we still see occasionally maintenance related issues, occasionally bogus parts. Usually, if I can generalize just a little bit here, is if you're seeing a mechanical failure, it's usually attributable to something the pilot has done, either a blade strike or a tail rotor strike, and so the purely mechanical failures, these helicopters that are used at least commercially, and many of them privately as well, are over-engineered. They're very robust machines. I really have a huge faith in the aircraft themselves, properly maintained and operated within limits. And HAC's efforts about what we do, and it's always difficult to figure out how you can be most effective. For years, the TSB has participated heavily in our annual conference with programs like Accident Year in Review, town hall sessions to get feedback from our members at our conference. This was driven by our HAC committees. Over the years, they have developed best practices that are above a minimum regulatory standard, but in key areas of helicopter flight operations like firefighting, firefighting competencies for the different skills required to fight fires, onshore seismic, mountain flying, heli skiing. These were entirely driven and developed by our committees that are composed of people in operations that specialize in this sort of work. We do topical safety articles in the trade magazines and in our HAC newsletter, which comes out every couple of weeks. HAC's participation on the vertical aviation safety team, I encourage you to look up this website if you haven't already been there. It has a wealth of global information as it relates to the safe operation of a helicopter. You can watch videos, you can see best practices from all sorts of countries from all over the world. We, at our annual convention, we do safety courses and seminars on recent trends and fatal accident types, VFR into adverse weather, flying in the wired environment. We operate at a low altitude, and wires are just like spider webs. They're quite visible in the right light, but in the wrong light, they can be completely invisible. Cockpit resource management, which, you know, you tend to think in a single pilot operation, what's cockpit resource management? Is it the same as crew resource management? It's even as a single pilot, it's managing effectively the resources at your disposal. So understanding what options you have and using them in a logical way. Mountain flying knowledge. We delivered courses for a number of years on mountain flying, and the hazards of low flying are some sort of topical issues that related very directly to the type of accidents that we were seeing. And the well, I'm sorry, I did intend to mention, I will go back for just a moment to say the weather scenario, same thing with fuel starvation, they can, if you're getting so low on fuel that there's a risk of a flame out, you should be landing, and it's not an option. And it's an entirely different emotional dynamic in an airplane, but in a helicopter, you know, you can land, you can communicate with the base, have one of the other company aircraft operating in the area fly out to you. It's a little embarrassing, but it's better than a flame out and an auto rotation into the bush. So, and that was the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
I don't know where to start. That was a wealth of information. Thank you very much, Fred. I guess I'll start just with a quick comment. I really like that you had mentioned InReach or using similar satellite communication tools. We certainly want to reduce the demand of SAR or search and rescue that GA has on our public safety resources where we can, and to lessen that the impact when we need to make those calls. So I thought that was really worth, that was a good mention there. And the connection of PDM and even the numbers, 3 fatal accidents per year on average. What are your thoughts of that with the recent numbers that Simon and Ludovic had shared in 2018 and 2019, 3 fatal accidents in those same years, so that 30% increase?
Right. Well, there are so many variables. One of the things that we have labored, a deficiency we've labored under as an industry, is the absence of hours operated from one year to the next. If we get a rainy fire season across Canada, even if you consider the same rate of accidents, you're going to see a lower number. If you get a busy fire season like the last one we had last summer, you can see an increase. So without that metric as it relates to the number of hours, the number of accidents, or even the number of fatal accidents, is really hard to put in context and understand whether we're improving or doing better. And what's more is all we get, because it's confidential information, but the only source of information we have for total number of hours is the annual airworthiness reporting system. And it just gives the total number of hours without regard to mission type, without regard to number of hours flown by mission. So it's really difficult to attach causation or to a scenario where you have only limited metrics to make a sensitive analysis.
Concur with that. And just to reiterate the purpose of tonight's seminar, it's certainly to get an overall view of what's happening within the recreational helicopter world, but it's to take in the lessons from the commercial side and see how we can apply them in GA. There was a question earlier if you see those night vision goggles moving, something that you see GA pilots moving towards. Do they have an application within the GA world?
Was that question directed at me? Did you want me to try to field that?
You're on mute.
We can't hear you, Sharon.
I'm going to scratch another one off there. So a night moment that I've done that tonight. But that was a combination between regulator and just thoughts from you, Fred. So let's start from TC because they look ready to answer.
No, not really. NVG for GA, why not? But NVG require a lot of training, a lot of recurrent training, because it's not that easy. It's a really great tool, that's for sure, but it requires a lot of training. It's not that easy. And so it's a great tool, but we're not in the same department that looking at this. So I don't have any word on this, but just for my experience on NVG, it's great, but you need a lot of experience, a lot of hours if you want to stay proficient on it, because we don't have the same perception under NVG. We don't see the relief. We have our time to perceive distance. We can see the weather better, but actually it's not good at all. So there is a lot of things to learn from before going into NVG. So that's my own thoughts. But I don't know where it stands now for approved NVG for GA. I'm not sure.
Roger. Okay, well let's shift over and close off the Helicopter Association presentation. You've actually given some really good examples and strategies already, Fred. But what are some best practices or lessons from the commercial side that specifically stand out to you that can be applied in general aviation?
I would say embracing the maintaining currency, doing annual training with a professional, And that it may include full-on auto rotations. It may include quick stops. It may include a variety of maneuvers, confined areas. You know, just like driving, you acquire bad habits over time, and it's important to have those cleaned up every year by someone that is doing it with regularity and can recognize that that right away. So that would be something that I would suggest. I would also say, and this is harder to do in general aviation than in commercial aviation, but the number of total hours in a year, I know as a former aircraft owner myself, there are periods of time where you may not operate the aircraft, and then you're jumping back into it and going. If you own an aircraft, you know, there's a responsibility, I think, to maintain your proficiency and your currency on it, even between annual training sessions. So those would be a couple of things that I would suggest. And finding a professional in the commercial aviation community that can go up and expose you to different scenarios, you know, things that you may not have seen in a long time, settling with power, experiences in sloped landings, where they can go out and push the limits of your experience into areas that you may not have done in a long time, maybe even not during your initial training. There's a tendency as well, I think, when you fly recreationally, just you want to get from one place to another, and you tend not to push yourself sometimes. You're up there to relax, and sometimes it can be stressful doing things that you haven't done in a long time. But under the supervision of a more experienced pilot, it can be really beneficial. Oh, one other thing I'm sorry I was going to say, scenario-based training, something that's really catching fire in the helicopter community. Some of the companies I've flown for send all their pilots every year to fly on a simulator. And I don't mean a high-tech simulator, but a desktop type simulator. And the scenario is pre-planned for you, and it can include a variety of things. It might include low fuel, deteriorating weather, deteriorating light, and they let you go through the emotions of wondering, well, when should I put down, and where would I put down, and who do I tell? And so very, very effective scenario-based training, because it forces you into uncomfortable scenarios and encourages you to make decisions early.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Fred. I hope that those kinds of activities can be made more accessible on the GA side. So good considerations. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. So at this point, we're now going to shift over to avionics and equipment. We have Garmin here. We've already had a little bit of mention some of their products. So Joey, Steve, and Daryl, I welcome you to join us on camera.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, welcome tonight.
Hello.
If you could, I don't know how your camera, what your device is, could you move it back slightly?
For Steve and Daryl?
Yes, please, Steve and Daryl. Okay. We'll take it.
We can move it back further here.
Oh, that's good. I only see you, Steve.
There, how's that?
I don't see Daryl, but that's totally okay. We'll just start it off here and get your presentation going so that we can learn more about all three of you. I know that there's some COPA membership ties in here, so good to have the three of you here.
Thanks for having us.
Very good. I'll get your slide kicked off.
Actually, let me jump ahead here, Sharon, if that's okay.
No problem.
Yeah, let's start here. Okay, do you want me to dive right in?
Sounds great. Looking forward to learning more about Garmin and Maxcraft Avionics.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks again, Sharon, and thanks to COPA for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here, and lots of insights that I've learned, certainly. My name is Joey Ferreira. I'm the Sales and Customer Experience Manager at Garmin, and generally my job and charter is to help liaise our products and services and connect those with organizations and make sure that there's awareness and that we can take feedback back into Garmin to make things even better. Listening to all these things, I certainly have a lot of notes that I took down as part of this discussion earlier, so I appreciate that. And, as I mentioned, I am a fixed wing pilot. That's my RV10. I recently completed that over the past year with 3 others. Instrument and commercial rated fixed wing pilot here in the U.S. And with me, I have Daryl McIntosh and Steve Nunn representing Maxcraft Avionics in Canada, one of our longest standing dealers. I noted, I don't want to steal their thunder here, but that they began in 1989, which is also the same year that Garmin was born. So we've been in business the exact same amount of time. So it's a pleasure to have them here. And I'll jump back here for you both to introduce yourselves as well.
Thanks, Joey.
Yeah.
First off, I find it ironic that we advertise ourselves as being the technology integration experts, yet we're the ones who had all the problems tonight getting online. So my apologies. As Joey said, we've been in business since '89, and Daryl really is going to be the major speaker on our behalf because he has probably over 40 years experience in the rotary market. That's where he started before we started Maxcraft. So Daryl and I look after the business. We're based in the Greater Vancouver area, but we do specifically rotary stuff around the world, doing upgrades. So Daryl founded it way back when and is the president, and myself, Steve, I'm the director of business development. We're also both fixed wing guys as far as pilots go, but we both have considerable time sitting in helicopters, getting experience with that. Before I pass it back to Joey, I'll just say a couple things just on topics that were brought up. The NVG concept for private guys is difficult to achieve. We do a lot of NVG work, but it is both expensive to implement, and the goggles are a controlled product, so that makes it not practical for the private rotary guy. And then the second point I wanted to make, and Joey and Daryl will expand on this, but this concept of how do we make private helicopter pilots safer. The previous presenters did a great job talking about the challenges with that, and I think the word proficiency is really valuable, and there is obviously a significant difference, be it rotary or fixed wing, that we see with our customers between a private individual and somebody who's flying commercially every day, possibly with 2 pilots, certainly, as Fred said, with a lot of recurrency training. So that's the challenge for a private pilot, but there's also an upside in that the technology that companies like Garmin have really allowed a private pilot in the last, let's say, decade, and certainly even more so in the last 5 years, really lean on that new technology that's out there now to compensate somewhat for the proficiency differences. So, and where we see differences, a commercial helicopter operation is going to look very closely at a return on investment on their avionics dollars. Where a private individual, if he's buying a helicopter, cost is not the leading concern. So they often can more easily justify putting in technology to help them lower the risk in their flying.
That's a great point, Steve. I took that same takeaway from Fred and really captured his words with proficiency. It's certainly something that we're not replacing here with technology, but something that we can certainly help while the pilot is operating. and become aware, add to situational awareness and some of those things. And so Sharon asked us to put together some content to help shore up what some of the technologies are that we're delivering today for helicopter operators. And so we've got this photo here of a more modernly retrofitted AS350 aircraft here. Daryl, do you want to just kind of walk us through a little bit of this, what's installed and some of the technologies in this panel?
Yeah, sure. So this is kind of a typical package that you would put in a guy who wants to properly equip his helicopter for safety and situational awareness. In front of the pilot, that is what's called a G600h TXI. Garmin had the G600h product for at least 10 years, I believe. The TXI is a much enhanced version with better screen resolution, faster processors, and the form factor is a little bit bigger. If you look in front of him, the screen, it's maybe hard to see, but if you look, it's split into two sections. There's the PFD portion, which is your primary flight instruments on the right, and on the left hand is a multifunction display portion. The PFD portion has an attitude display and a horizontal situation display. The left-hand side is the multifunction, and he can call up a variety of things on that. Overlaid on the primary display is synthetic vision, which is basically a world database that's overlaid on the attitude indicator to give you a real perspective of the terrain that's in front of you. And that can help really well in low visibility operations and smoke and things like that, to just make sure that you still, I mean, it's not real vision, it's synthetic, it's what's there based on your position and your attitude, but it's pretty darn real, and it's pretty darn helpful. The G600h gets its position data from navigation position data from a GPS receiver. This particular aircraft has two of them in there. On the left-hand panel, you'll see a Garmin. It's called a GTN 650. It's their small one, XI, and in the pedestal, you'll see a large one. It's a GTN 750 XI. Both of those are GPSs with embedded navigation and communication transceivers. So they're your radios and navigation, and they also have multifunction display capabilities. Those devices are providing the position data to the primary flight display that provides, so then the synthetic vision knows what to present to you. Also driving that G600h is a solid state attitude heading and reference system, which is a modern solid state gyro that replaces your legacy attitude gyros that used to be a spinning mass that we've had since the World War II, which were problematic and had errors in them and failed all the time. The solid state ones are deadly accurate and rarely fail. There's also an air data computer that's providing that airspeed and altitude tapes on that display. In addition to all that, you've got what you can't see in the cockpit. There's various optional remote devices that bring you safety enhancements in there. You can have a active traffic advisory system that will present the traffic rate on your screen on the map portion of the multifunction display, or right in your attitude screen. If it's in front of you, it'll show as a dot that's increasing in size right in your attitude display. And it'll also provide callouts of the traffic with the direction. Traffic 3 miles, 2 o'clock high, things like that. So also, this aircraft could or could not have a Sirius XM weather data, which can be displayed on, so it requires a subscription, but it can be displayed on those displays, either on the GTN navigators or on the multifunction display portion of the G600 TXI. And there's other things that can be hooked up. The display is capable of a video display. So if you had some kind of a enhanced vision camera on board, it can be displayed on there. So there's lots of things. If you look at the bottom of the pedestal in that helicopter, that is Garmin's new G600h Autopilot, which is just a stunning piece of technology that I could probably fly the helicopter with that. And I'd love to be a helicopter pilot, but I'm not. But that thing makes it pretty darn easy. And it's Joey can probably explain that a bit better than me because I'm not explaining it every day, but it's got multi-modes where it can help you even when you're not actively using it. I'll pass that back to Joey to explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, great kind of overview. There's lots of technology there, and I'll just go in depth of some of the things. We scale all this technology across, of course, fixed wing as well as helicopters, but recognizing that there are different needs for the helicopter community, given certainly a lot of the things that we've heard here. We've tailored some of this technology with the rotorcraft market in mind. And that started with the helicopter synthetic vision technology, which Daryl mentioned is like a 3D depiction of the terrain, obstacles, and the wires around you, and then provides shades, either red or yellow for caution, warning alerts to let you know your imminent conflict with that particular terrain. And this is just helping you understand. We make different shades for the helicopter community. With fixed wing, we typically offer just the yellow and the red, recognizing that, again, helicopters are operating low to the ground, and they need to understand when they may be in a canyon, they've got terrain all around them, a little bit more depth to what that looks like. And so we offer multiple different shades so you can, at a glance, look at the map and understand your proximity to that terrain. And that's what that looks like in a 2D depicted map with the helicopter's position there. And then instantly you've got a good situational awareness of what that terrain is around you. We also offer, again, of course, we're not advocating looking down at the displays. Your heads are outside VFR. And so should something come into conflict, we're going to alert that to you so you can take note, or maybe you've already taken note operating that close to terrain. But that would give you an audible cue while you're looking outside and help you become aware of close proximity to terrain so you can take corrective action. As Daryl mentioned, our helicopter flight control, automatic flight control system, or GFC 600h, is now on market for the AS350, just certified as well for the Bell 505 helicopter, and it's getting really, really good reviews. I have flown this in our flight test helicopter in our AS350, and as a fixed wing guy, trying to hover a helicopter wasn't a pretty picture, but I could do it with this system in place. It's got a stability augmentation system. I also found that in a fixed wing aircraft that's inherently stable, flying a helicopter, when I was flying it as part of this demo, it constantly wanted to do things because I wasn't putting enough control inputs into it to just keep it in stable flight. And so it has a stability augmentation system built into it that helps just in normal flight of the aircraft and make sure that you're staying in the envelope. And likewise with our overspeed and low speed protections, and then our electronic stability protection help provide limit cues so the pilot's got the feedback in the controls, which I'll get to in just a moment here, a little bit more depth. Since we have your GPS position information and we have some algorithms built into it, we know when you're attempting to do a hover and when you get to a certain airspeed, so we can understand that, and then we can lock that in real well. And then we have cyclic controls as well with beep trim switches, etc., so that you don't have to take your hands off the controls, which I also learned is near impossible to do in a helicopter when I was had the opportunity to fly. So the Esp Technology, we've adapted this from our fixed wing world. And again, this is really to help keep the aircraft flying within the limits. And again, while the helicopter pilot flying visually, looking outside the aircraft, if you were to get into a position that was past a normal operating envelope, either pitch or roll, or too fast, V&E, or too slow while you're decelerating, we will help provide a force field in the controls, so you know just by feel of the controls that you're outside of a limit. almost like a detent, if you will. So it's going to put a force field back in the controls and pressure to let you know that you're operating out of a normal envelope, and is going to help nudge the aircraft back into a normal flight attitude and condition. And then the further that you push out of it, the harder it's going to press back to keep in control, keep that helicopter in the right flight attitude and safe flight attitude. Really amazing technology, just standard with the package, just like it is in our cars now, where it should be. And Daryl mentioned this, data link weather, of course, and we've heard a little bit about that. So we've got good awareness, real-time data link weather, either with SiriusXM or Iridium data link, where you can do some text messaging, etc., as well with that to keep in contact. And likewise, our traffic system can help provide not only information about other aircraft and trend vectors, but really where you'll converge using some advanced position information that we're picking up now from mostly ADS-B out-equipped aircraft. So we do the vector math for you, so you don't have to figure that out, and we'll let you know where the two aircraft are destined to merge or converge. We also do some helicopter-specific traffic. So if you are operating with other commercially, then we'll help reduce the nuisance alerts that may result while you're visual and operating with those other helicopters, whether it be around a scene or a new scene, etc. So we do build some smarts in there yet again to help with the helicopter community. So that's just a quick overview. There's just quite a bit more depth, of course, as you can imagine, with all that. But we put our contact information up here. Should you have any questions about this technology, what we went through is coming off the production line with a lot of new helicopters, but it's not limited there. It's also, we're bringing it into the retrofit market now and have been for some years. So you can have this newer technology in an older airframe.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'll just leave that. Let's leave that slide up just for a moment longer so that folks can write down your emails and have access to that. Thank you for that presentation, Joey, Steve, Daryl. I'd say that the first half of tonight's panel or presentations were filled with some realities and dangers when it comes to flying, specifically helicopters. You came in and provided a little bit of a respite, I would say, with demonstrating how powerful and helpful technology can be in mitigating risks. So thank you very much for that. I have put it in the chat. I had posed a question to everyone here of how technology has helped you while flying helicopters, but perhaps I'll ask another question. Has there been a time equipment has enhanced your safety or helped you through a tricky or challenging situation? So as we're collecting some responses there, I have a couple questions for you folks here. So let's take off the slides now. For the presentation, you demonstrated a pretty good wide suite of the products and functionalities of your avionics and your tools. Are there any terrain awareness products that show a reduction in accidents? I know that might be some data that's hard to collect, but if you have any examples or response to that.
Yeah, and I'll start, and I know Daryl and Steve will have some thoughts here as well. Here in the U.S., the FAA mandated for commercial operators the use of radar altimeters, and they went even a step further for HIMSS, emergency medical services operators, and mandated HTAWS awareness as well. That was done in the spring of 2017. And so some 3-4 years later now, I've not seen a particular study or a result of that, but just knowing all the things that go into a mandate in, things that are put into place, they're typically for the results of some of the things that have been discussed here that have been seen, and likewise. So we don't necessarily have the results of some of those, the implications of the equipage that was done in 2017, but we have to believe that it was done for good reason. Daryl, Steve, what do you think on that?
The technology certainly is helping, but it's hard to, like you said, there's no measured measured data, but we have anecdotal evidence of accidents that happened that we don't think would have happened if they would have had things in there, and people telling us where they've been saved by or possibly prevented accidents. That's happened in both light private fixed wing and helicopters.
I think we've had numerous scenarios where people have said, "Hey, this really got me out of an awkward spot." But I think what's happening, and they were talking about it earlier with the UIMC, is that if you go intentionally IMC and you get out, we're probably not seeing reports of that. So I think some of this technology is doing two things. One is it's making sure that people see what they're about to go into and realize that they should be taking Fred's advice and putting down and grabbing those cookies. But I think also if they do get inadvertent IMC, they've got some three-dimensional synthetic vision that they can get out quickly, turn around and go the other way and prevent it. And I think, unfortunately, no one's the wiser that no one says anything. I think the new control systems that Joey was talking about, the G600, that for sure is going to save lives, unquestionably, both in the making it a more stable platform, but being able to hit a level button and get yourself out of there. So I think this technology is still maturing, and we're going to see more and more saves because of it.
But we may never be able to measure them.
Yeah.
Well, data is hard to track sometimes, and that's the reality with it. So at least we see some positive effects to some degree, or we can allude to it. With everybody back on screen now, and we were looking at 15 minutes to the end of tonight's seminar. I'm going to quickly jump to an audience question that I think might stimulate a good conversation on the thoughts around mandatory flight reviews for pilots in Canada. I think we might start with TC, but open to anybody else who has thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can answer that one, Sharon. But also, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to what the folks were saying about the technology. I mean, it's amazing. It's incredible, the technology we have. And I'm sure it definitely is helping pilots save their potential oopsie. We're doing a study here at Carleton University about new technology coming into the cockpit. And one of the things we found so far is that when it comes to experienced pilots, the technology is another safety net. But when it comes to less experienced pilots, the technology is a little bit of a safety concern. And I think what we have to do is go back to what, well, not just Fred, but Isabel and everyone had been saying earlier. You know, when we talk about currency versus proficiency, on the proficiency side, we tend to think it's about the handling of the airplane. But in today's world, I think it comes to learning and understanding the technology better, because it's not a good time to try and learn it in the air. And I think there needs to be a lot more time spent on the ground, really understanding the technology, because, you know, there's so many different modes and there's so many different things. And, you know, these days it couples into an autopilot and, you know, and there's more hands-off flying. And I think with the less experienced pilot, we're more heads in, heads down, and whereas the more experienced pilot is using it as a safety net, as another safety net. So we're doing this study at Carleton University, as I said, and it's really interesting. And I think we really have to now emphasize that proficiency is not just aircraft handling, but it's the new technology and really understanding it so that when you are in the air, it is an aid and not a detriment.
Yeah, Simon, I couldn't agree with you more. As we're rolling this technology out more broadly right now in the GA fixed wing community, our GFC 500, GFC 600 autopilot technology, for example, has widespread, a lot more widespread adoption because it has certifications across more make model airframes. And and certainly we have a lot more tools in place to help with the upfront, awareness of what that is while they're on the ground. We have in-classroom training that we offer here at the factory with a couple days of CFI trained avionics experts. And then, we have tools then that we encourage you to go up with your instructor once you've gone through those. So we have, tools that we're using to help educate kind of through the process from the ground, to a qualified instructor when you're in the air, which is certainly, how you want to progress that way.
And of course, the demographic is changing. The average age of a GA pilot is 65 for fixed wing. I'm not sure what it is for helicopters, but, we've got that to consider as well, because it's not as easy, and I'm in that category. I'm nearly 65, and it's not as easy for me to learn these things now. So, it's important, I think. Anyway, to go on to the question about why we don't have recurrent training in the air, I can answer this in two ways. First of all, one of the mandates that we had as a general aviation safety campaign and program was to encourage pilots through a non-regulatory route to improve their proficiency in their currency. Well, not the currency, but the proficiency. And so the program has focused very much on trying to embrace and encourage the GA community to do just that. And we did have a proposal to have 24-month recurrency in an aircraft some years ago. But if we're honest about it, there was a large group that represents GA pilots that fought against it, even though we had it written. However, that group has now changed in terms of their thoughts about this. And we're seeing that there's more and more GA pilots that are, from a survey that we did, that are actually flying with instructors more. And also there's more GA pilots that are actually asking for this regulation to be put in. And so we have already written an MPA to have a requirement for 24-month recurrency or biannual recurrency, is it? Yeah. It's there, it's sitting in the side wings. But one of the things that we're doing with it is it's kind of there sitting right now because we still believe that the community is really trying their best to seek out an instructor or a more senior pilot to increase their proficiency. And we'd like to encourage and embrace that. We are seeing the stats go up, indicating that the community is doing quite well with that. But we do have the MPA sitting there. And if, as we move forward, we're getting more positive response from the community that is what they would like to see, we can definitely assist in that way.
Just to go back quickly, you can't see Simon, but he's a very young 64 or 63-year-old. So, just to quickly address the requirements, I think there's a balance there of not wanting more regulations and more restrictions on pilots. But the safety seminar program that we have, it actually indicates really strongly how strong the safety culture is within the recreational flying in Canada, and how much of an appetite there is for learning and keeping current. People are attending sessions that don't qualify for recurrency. So those are very positive numbers to me. Yeah. So wanted to address, did you have something to say there?
Yeah, I did. And, maybe the question is out there is, okay, well, if you've got it standing on the sidelines, why aren't you implementing it? And two reasons, really. Number one, we're encouraged by what we're seeing from the community itself. And if they continue to improve without our having to regulate it, we would much prefer that route. And one of the reasons that we would really prefer that route is because think of our geographic situation. Think of the number of pilots out there who are in remote areas and don't necessarily have access or easy access to instructors or to being able to do recurrency. Think of the number of Canadian pilots who are overseas you know, and they have another license and they're flying out of country and, you know, having to have access again. So, you know, we're looking at the bigger picture, and we're also keeping in mind of what we're trying to do as a safety program, and that's to embrace and encourage the community to increase their own standards for best practices and for proficiency and so on.
Very good. I should mention that I put up a poll earlier asking the audience here today what they think the next fatal accident will be. That's not meant to be facetious by any means. It's just to indicate what we foresee. 20% foresaw CFET, so controlled flight into terrain, 8% loss of control at takeoff or landing, 4% engine failure, 40% unintentional flight into IMC, and 20% low-level flying. So does that surprise anyone based on the conversations we've had here tonight? Maybe I'll ask you, Isabel. It was, you can pop open the poll section on, oh, you're on mute.
I was on mute. I was just trying to get my mouth come back to life. I hate to say it, but no, it doesn't surprise me. It's not, I mean, it's not a situation that we like, but unfortunately we've seen them in the past and we still see them.
Well, I think that there's good considerations, again, of seeing the realities of flying and knowing that there's equipment out there. Just doing a quick fire round, if there are any specific factors that this group here thinks may be weighing down our ability to improve safety within the helicopter community. I'll head over to you first, Fred. Do you think there's any specific factors that may be weighing down our ability to improve safety?
I would say there are some that are beyond our control, in the sense that you can't drive people to fly more unless they have a reason to do it. Perhaps a system where they are obliged to visit each of the issues that relate to safety in the course of any given year, to say that they've taken a course. And I know there's the biennial flight review concept, but I don't know that there's something that I sort of disagree a bit in terms of the regulatory approach. I think it's got to be a cultural change. That people have to drive themselves to do the recurrent training each year. It's got to be a cultural change.
Yeah.
So I don't have so there's no easy answer to these. There are some ideas, but there's no easy answer.
No. And well, yeah, I totally agree. But you know, I really think that all that's needed is the desire of the community to do it, to engage and work with us, and very similar to what we're doing with the other GA segments. And I see by some of the chat that already we have a couple of people that would love to, you know, to be on the working group with us, if we're going to move it forward, and we certainly would like to. So that already shows me that there's some desire, and now all we have to do is follow through on that desire. And I agree totally. You know, it would be much better for the GA community to encourage it and themselves and their colleagues to raise the bar higher to standard and have regulation put in. Because sometimes, well, not sometimes, well, yeah, I'll say sometimes, regulations don't always resolve the issue. You know, they may resolve an issue over here, but it may impact over here. And so for the greater good, and what we're trying to espouse is, you know, we would like to see the communities do it themselves, work towards it themselves with our assistance, you know, rather than having to put the foot down.
Thank you for that. I know we're definitely running low on time, but I want to go back to the avionics topic and towards equipment. If Steve or Daryl or Joey, if you could give us some examples of how your equipment has helped pilots in those tricky situations, especially in relation to the poll we just saw, the conversations here of proficiency and UIMC.
I would just like to say one little thing. It's related to that, but not exactly. I've been working in the helicopter segment of avionics for 40 years, and I've worked with a lot of commercial operators and a fair number of private operators. And one of the key things is that the commercial operators, they've got things that are driving their initiatives for safety. They've got added regulatory requirements for training and things like that. They've also got, often they have clients that are very safety orientated and are pushing them to have certain safety initiatives, certain safety equipment installed on the aircraft and things like that. And then there's some operators have their own safety initiatives because they want to differentiate themselves from other operators. And then here's the poor private one that there's nobody telling them what he should or shouldn't do exactly. They're just kind of on their own. That's where I applaud this COPA initiative, because I think it can help get some common guidance to safety, and technology is just one part of it. The recurrent training and the proficiency and currency and all that is the most important. But there's no exact thing driving them to any certain standard in the private, where there's all kinds of guidelines and road marks or whatever you want to call them in the commercial segment. The private people it's more wide open. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to do better and maybe pay attention to the rest of the commercial segment for some clues. I don't have exact examples of savings of, maybe Steve does or Joey does.
Well, I do, but it's maybe the opposite. I mean, we had a customer who committed to putting a primary flight display, the G600h into his helicopter. He booked it in, he was due in 2 months, and went out flying in marginal conditions, shouldn't have been out there, clipped the top of the mountain by literally 10 feet and didn't make it. And if it had been 2 months later, that accident would never have happened. If you've flown behind synthetic vision, what I tell people is you would literally have to be unconscious to have a known CFIT accident when you've got synthetic vision on. It's blinding neon red in your face, and it's quite obvious. So those kind of things are really going to help. And when I listened to Sharon's survey, I didn't write them all down, but I think 3 of those things technology could either alleviate or drastically reduce that. So that's maybe not the example that the nice cheery example everybody wants to hear, but that's the reality of it. And the other thing, just to sum it up, I think we're all talking about education, but I think that education goes a little deeper. It's up to Garmin and Maxcraft and likes to help educate the customer on what technology exists. So we're pretty proactive on that, but we're astounded by how many private operators come in here and have no idea the technology that they could put in their aircraft. And once we sit down and explain it to them as a pilot to pilot, they're both grateful and happy to integrate that. So I think this education is multifaceted. I think we need recurrency training. We need technology to go in there. We need to educate them about the technology, and we need the training aids that Garmin and likes are coming up with to be able to utilize that technology and understand it.
And I do want to mention that I do concur with what somebody else said about being, learning your systems. We do see some pilots that have put the technology in there but didn't take the proper time to learn it and or get with a flight instructor, and they're getting distracted by their technology, and that's we don't want to see that either, where they're distracted by their technology, and that's the cause of the accident. And that's mostly a training issue, but also an awareness issue. We try to make sure that we make the pilots aware that they really need to learn this stuff on the ground, or with a safety pilot, not trying to learn it at the worst possible time.
But this is where Garmin and the likes have really made significant inroads. If I look at the last generation of technology, let's call it 10 years older, it was much harder to use. You needed much more training. And I would say Garmin is on the forefront of this. Their technology that they're introducing now is far more intuitive, that you don't need as much training. And honestly, there's a lot more stuff going on in the background that the pilot has no choice, that the Garmin's displaying that synthetic vision, that Garmin's doing some, giving you feedback in the flight controls to let you know that you're exceeding the envelope you should be in. So I think, as Joey and his team works out the next generation, it's going to be even more intuitive and therefore less need of training.
Yeah. And I'd just add to that too, Steve and Daryl, and revisit the previous question, Sharon, that you mentioned regarding barriers for us as a technology provider. It's fielding that technology. We just can't get it out quick enough. And there's a variety of reasons of why that is. And there's been a lot of softening of positions, regulatory positions, et cetera, that have sped adoption tremendously over the past 5 to 10 years, specifically as it relates to some of the lighter GA aircraft adopting some of the technology we were putting in experimental home builds, recognizing that technology was far superior to the analog gyros that Daryl mentioned earlier that were failing, that pilots were depending upon to fly the aircraft and keep it upright. So predominantly, it's for us. It's getting all of these new features that are coming out. Again, like I mentioned, we get these standard technologies now in cars when they roll off the line. They're coming off in airplanes, in helicopters off the line. But it's getting it back into the fleet for all the airframes that are out there today, and doing it quickly and efficiently. It takes a lot of approvals to get all that done, and proof and testing, and there's just a huge hurdle there that we have to bring this technology and keep it current for the industry.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that add-on, Joey. I think this has been a very healthy dialogue so far tonight. And Daryl, I agree with you that this is a community that certainly needs more attention. The numbers that were shared by TC earlier indicate that there needs to be more monitoring of what the trends are, and actual proactive work to start reversing some numbers. There was a comment here of the chance to get together with other pilots and to share their knowledge. That is why COPA exists, to have community and to encourage continuous improvement, particularly in an area where industry gets all of the resources, the training opportunities. We also want to ensure that recreational pilots get that type of service as well. So I am pleased to share that we'll be launching a mentorship program that connects all kinds of pilots, all kinds of aircraft operators, from helicopter to mountainous flying. And so that will be one mechanism to support that. In closing with that, I'd like to just ask each and every one of you, I'm just looking to my other screen here. If you are serving as a mentor, so keeping to the mentorship line, to your younger self, what kind of advice would you offer to a newly qualified pilot in the context of new technology, in the context of the information that was shared here tonight? And I'll start with you, Isabel.
Sorry, I have to wake up my mouse every time. What I would tell myself is the technology is fantastic. It's there to help you, but it will not replace knowledge, and it will not replace skills. So take the time to master your system, take the time to understand, and then use the technology to help you out.
Very good. Thank you. Ludovic?
Yeah, if I have to give advice, I think I would say it's not really related to technology, but it will say don't impose yourself too much pressure, especially when you're a young pilot. You know, we feel always pressure, but there is always another day. Even in GA, it's not like a commercial, but we always self-impose pressure to fly. Stick to your limit and take a step back into your aircraft and reevaluate. Especially in helicopter, when you can land anywhere, it's better to land, reassess, take off if it's possible, otherwise wait. And about technologies, yes, great tool. I just want to mention one point. At some point with the General Aviation Safety Campaign, we had the emerging technology working group. It was fairly active, and we put it dormant because we didn't have the resource or time to take care of it. But we make some advancement articles, and we want to create workshop to help other pilot or experienced pilot with technology to help others to use them on the ground and in flight. So that may be something, if there is a good people who are willing to see it again, we can probably reopen this one that we started.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
Okay, thank you very much. Over to you, Simon. Same question.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, prepare for every single flight that you do, even if it's just a local one and one that you've done over and over again, because situations change on a daily basis. And really, the only constant in flying an aircraft is change. So don't rush, be prepared for any eventuality. Give yourself that pre-takeoff brief as to what you're going to do should you have an engine flare on takeoff. Know and look for outs while you're flying. So that's one thing. And another thing I've learned over the years is, and Fred mentioned a little bit, if your stomach is a little queasy, if your heart's pounding a little bit faster, or you're asking yourself, should I or shouldn't I? Well, you shouldn't. So if you're asking the question, because the thing is, when that's happening, that's your knowledge and experience trying to tell you something. And one of the big things that's continually come up through our program and campaign, and also tonight through this discussion, is that we're made aware of things, or we become aware of things, but we still continue. So what is it? What is that little nugget that we need to kind of find a way to get into? It's up here. How do we get in there and say, no, if you see these things happening, you've got to do something about it and just don't push forward. There's a 3-strike rule that I learned from one of our ground instructors years ago. And that 3-strike rule is, as you're preparing for or going to do your flight, if something happens or, an occurrence or something out of the ordinary, okay, that's strike 1. So maybe you forgot the pitot cover on the aircraft. Okay, there's strike 1. You go and take it off and you continue, and then maybe something else happens. Okay, that's strike 2. So at this stage of the game, if you've got a couple of things that are already kind of, what's going on here, maybe it's just not your turn to fly that day. And at strike 2, you have the option of, okay, maybe we don't do the flight, or maybe we'll return if we're already in the air. But we shouldn't let it get to strike 3. But if we do get to strike 3, then we're definitely out. And that's when you say, okay, we're not flying today, or we're just going to turn around and go back. And remember, a couple of things. First of all, it's always much better to be on the ground wishing you're in the air than in the air wishing that you're on the ground. And you know what? We're recreational pilots, and there should be no pressure to cancel or discontinue a flight. I know it might be embarrassing, and I know your pride may be hurt, but the thing is, it's really unfortunate the number of people who decided not to be embarrassed or decided that their pride was more important, and they're not here with us today. So that's and personally, over the years, 49 years in aviation now, I've lost 18 friends or colleagues to fatal accidents. So I know it can happen, and I don't take anything for granted when I prepare or go for a flight.
Thank you for sharing that. pride or not listening to those indicators can be quite costly. I'll switch over to you, Joey, and then I'll kind of shift the question a little bit to offer one pre-flight or flying habit that the rest of the panel here does to ensure that they keep their rotors or their propellers running, so that we have a balance of answers. So, Joey, what kind of advice would you share to your younger self as a newly qualified pilot?
Well, I don't know that I've got the wisdom yet to be in that position, but I will. I've definitely learned a lot here. I'll borrow some words from one of my mentors in the industry. Tom Turner's the director of safety at the American Bonanza Society and a good friend of mine, and he always strives for mastery of flight. And a lot of what Isabel, you had mentioned, just in terms of there's not necessarily a perfect flight, but striving for that perfect flight every time, and always learning. I think just since I've been at Garmin over 11 years now, I've flipped over the product line. There's not a single product in the line now that we sell when I was there when I started with the company. So, just knowing that in technology, and then obviously there's shifts in the rest of in the business, but we're moving, everybody's moving fast. The things are changing. Everything's very dynamic. And I learn something new every single day. And so I try to be a professional pilot with everything I do, and strive for perfection, and just really assess where that doesn't occur in my flights and in my regime. So mastery of flight.
Great advice. Even when you're flying for fun, to be serious about it, right?
Yep, that's right.
Fred, what about you? Any last words on this topic?
I agree with many of the other comments that we've already heard, but I would emphasize just the principle of making conservative decisions while you're new and learning, as far as weather, as far as flight planning, as far as taking the time in advance to prepare and look at the aircraft, and just conservative decision making.
Very good. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up with Steve and Daryl.
Okay, I'll go first. My main one, I think, is a very broad term that I like, and everybody should like it: airmanship. It kind of encompasses everything, but airmanship means that you can't rely on the technology. Technology is just one of the many tools in your toolbox. Airmanship means that you need to understand all the tools in your toolbox, and that's your weather briefings, it's your pre-flight, it's your assessing yourself whether you're fit to fly that day. There's a whole raft of them, and I think airmanship, in the big definition of it, is the single most important. That's all.
Mine is Joey touched on it, and that is, if I rewound my flying career, then I would go back and find some really strong mentors, multiple mentors who have far more experience than I do. With aviation, there's lots of things that they've done and realized that they shouldn't have done that I don't want to experience. I'd rather learn from them. So I think there's a vast wealth of knowledge from experienced pilots who are very willing to give it. And I think this is a good example where, if you're a private rotary guy, maybe go find a guy like Fred Jones and pick his brain about how the commercial segment does it, and then mimic their operations, even though you're a private operator.
Awesome. Well, if you're all rushing to reach out to Fred Jones after this, be kind.
It's not surgically attached, so just feel free.
Or definitely attend those Helicopter Association of Canada seminars and the conference that's coming up. There'll be a lot of good information there. So thank you, everybody. I know that we did go over time, but there was just so much good information here and worthwhile of sitting through it. Appreciate all the knowledge, time, expertise that you committed to tonight. And even though it's a smaller community, it's still an important community to address. And this resource, it will live on. It's a recording that will be available to other future pilots as well. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to those who attended. Tonight did not count towards recurrency. Next month will. It'll be our last seminar of the year for 2021, and we'll shortly release the 2022 schedule. We're very excited about that. It'll be a balance of all the different suggestions you've had throughout the year, and of course include more recurrent training. So thank you all. Have a great night, and see you next month. Be sure to come out because it'll be where we announce our new price packs. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.